Hi there, listener. This week we are talking about Slender Man, and in talking about Slender Man, we are going to be discussing the Waukesha, Wisconsin stabbing incident. So, we're going to start off with the content warnings for this week's episode, which include discussions and mentions of, but are not limited to, mental illness, particularly schizophrenia, attempted murder by stabbing, description of criminal proceedings involving children, child incarceration, and the implied kidnapping and endangerment of children, as is involved with the folklore of Slenderman. If this is not the episode for you, please go ahead and skip it. Maybe we'll catch you next week. Otherwise, let's get into the episode. We really appreciate you guys. Minus the hiccup this time. Hello, and welcome to Author's Note.
Don't listen.
Ooh, it's spooky time.
With only 2 weeks left of the month.
Listen. We had this whole month planned out with lots of fun, spooky stuff, and then 2 weeks in a row, I looked at the podcast and I simply went, no. And now we're here. So
actually, this is
carrying you over into autumn.
This is the last episode of October because November 2nd is a Tuesday. So
I don't feel bad. Feel bad.
Cheers.
Listen.
Happy spooky season.
Just because Halloween passes us does not mean the spooky season has to end. Final Fantasy XIV isn't having their Halloween event technically until the end of November. So listen.
Perfect.
We're fine.
Yeah.
We're fine. Yeah. Spooky content to come. You know, I always get sad because it's like, oh, all the Halloween stuff comes. And then one of my neighbors has the 12-foot skeleton lawn decor, but then they have also posed it on their lawn with a dozen other more human-sized skeletons.
Wow.
It's terrifying. It is the coolest house on the block, and I hope they win the competition.
Wow. Oh, there's a competition?
Yeah, my parents' neighborhood has a competition for Halloween decor. Wow. I don't know what they get, but I hope
it's a kiss. Wins. I hope it's a kiss from the mayor.
I hope it's not. Someone sent me a video of a girl just going into these guys' Instagram lives and calling them short kings to see how they would react, and none of them handled it well. It just reminded me of this time where I went to shadow a first date for a friend who was meeting up with a guy for Tinder, and I'm 6'1", and she was 6'1", and the guy said on his profile that he was 6'2", and he showed up and he didn't even come close to her shoulders.
Oh no. Oh no.
I'm sorry, short kings. You deserve love and to be appreciated. You shouldn't have to lie about your height.
To every short king, you are seen, even if I have to look down.
Stop. How dare you? Do not clown on them in this hour. How rude of you. Do they not deal with enough?
The stigma of being a short king.
I'm ending this podcast. We're done. Goodbye. 3-minute spooky episode. No. How dare you clown on them in this time?
I'm so sorry, short kings. Forgive
Your
me.
Your height privilege is showing.
Shut
Disgusting.
up.
You're not even the tallest one in this call right now, Teese.
Stop! Don't say that!
Teese, have you watched or read or imbibed anything fun this week?
I caught up to Maintenance Phase.
Girl, wash your face.
Girl, wash your face. The Rachel Hollis story.
I'm a little obsessed with Rachel Hollis now.
Are you? Are you gonna read her book?
Absolutely.
Are you gonna post about your stretch marks on Instagram and then pretend that you're Southern and that you love a monogram?
I can't get over that part. Why do all these women become influencers and then they pretend to be Southern?
I don't know. I really don't know. Anyway, guys, if you don't know what Maintenance Phase is,
it's a wonderful podcast.
It's a fantastic podcast. It is a podcast about health and wellness and kind of the scams that exist within the wellness world and industry, and it's delightful.
It breaks down fat phobia and crazy health trends and talks about our bodies in a way which is actually productive and purposeful, and
it's also been such a rewarding experience to listen to. I feel I've learned a lot about acceptance and how just marketing and advertising works and just how to properly be skeptical when it comes to the wellness industry. I'm really enjoying it. So if anybody's looking for a new podcast to listen to, that's it. But
if you listen to You're Wrong About, it's Michael Hobbs with Aubrey Gordon, and she's your fat friend online. So they're both delightful. I love Aubrey's laugh.
Aubrey's very good.
Yeah,
I do enjoy Aubrey. Big fan of her work. But anyway, mostly that. I kind of have been the personal butler of 2 stinky little dogs this past week. So I have not been able to. I did start the LuLaRoe mini series. Yes, LuLaRich, because you kept recommending it to me. So I'm halfway through done with that. But otherwise, besides my trip to go see Lamb and Last Duel, which is what we talked about yesterday, that's all I've really been doing lately. What about you? Last week. Last week. What about you?
I did my weekly catch up on What We Do in the Shadows, anticipating you watching that episode.
I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it yet because I fell asleep because that was Thursday night and something happened to me Thursday night. So
this coming week is the season finale. So
okay, so I gotta watch it. I'll probably watch it tomorrow. My mom and I caught up to Bake Off today. So
I need to catch up to Bake Off.
To Shadows tomorrow. Yeah. Yes.
I decided last night at 2 a.m. that I wanted to watch Midsummer again.
Oh boy, did you watch the original or the director's cut? What did you watch?
I watched the original. So
boy.
When I first saw it in the theaters, I saw the director's cut. So it was kind of nice to now watch the original, more truncated cut. I have a hard time getting through the first 20 minutes of that movie.
Understandable.
Yeah, and it's like if I can make it through that, because it is so oppressive and so dark and so purposeful in all of that, then I'll be able to get into the rest of the movie, obviously. So I got through it. It was great, as always. Love to watch it. Love to pick up on every tiny, teensy little detail and pick it apart each time I watch it. I think this is like my 3rd or 4th time watching it through. Always enjoy it. Good spooky flick.
Yeah.
Now, that's pretty much it for what I watched this week. So now we can talk about our topic of the episode as Mr. Slenderman.
Mr. Slenderman.
Mr. Slenderman.
Slenderman.
I thought for a very long time that it was all one word, and that's how I was writing it for most of my notes, and it's probably still in there in some of my notes.
Delightful.
This is Joshua Slenderman.
His name is Slenderman. Like the same way you would have like Sabrina
Goldman.
Spellman.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Slenderman. I have a habit of saying Slenderman. Like I always make it more of an O or an I sound when I say Slender Man. It feels horrible to say Slender Man. It's like I'm giving his name power and I refuse. So you should go, the Slenderman. And I do that with a lot of things.
Slender.
Yeah, Slendy. Wow. Remember when everybody used to call him Slendy in like 2012? God. Wow.
Yeah, so this week we're talking about the origins of Slender Man, what this sort of digital folklore is, what he has become, and I'm going to forewarn you, we are going to sort of do a very quick flyover of the stabbing incident. This is not a true crime podcast. We're not interested in being that. But I do want to talk about it because I think it's important, and I think there are some things in there that we need to cover as it relates to media and, overall fan perception of Slenderman as a property.
Nice.
So, a cool and fun thing I learned right off the bat that blew my mind was that Eric Nudsen was the creator of Slender Man. Eric Nudsen, if you are unfamiliar, is the creator and producer of the Down the Rabbit Hole YouTube documentary series.
Which I did not know, and getting your message was truly an experience for me because I shouted "what" out loud after reading that text. I was genuinely shocked. I did not know. Huge fan of Mr. Nudsen's work, and leave it to an icon like that to think of Slenderman.
So Eric Nudsen, under the username Victor Surge, made the initial post, which spawned Slender Man on June 10th, 2009. The initial post was to the Something Awful forums. They were hosting a Photoshop contest, and users were challenged to create paranormal images, which is something that has always been a little bit popular, but has definitely boomed in the past few years, especially with Twitter.
Yes.
If you're familiar with Siren Head, there's a creator by the name of Trevor, I'm blanking on his last name, Trevor Henderson.
Yes, it is.
But you see tons of these characters circulating around in horror circles. It's also very important that you don't take those photos, save them, and then repost them. You need to give credit to those artists also. This is just a personal pet peeve that I'm sharing on their behalf and on mine. It stops being funny when everyone has said me on my way to the kitchen to eat cheese out of the fridge at 3 a.m.
Yes.
Because I guarantee you 80 other people have said it on the photo already. You don't need to add, I'm sorry, your joke has been done before.
Yes.
So,
look at the replies.
Yeah. Just like the ones you agree with or think are funny. Eric's entries, again under the name Victor Surge, which I think is hysterical, were of 2 black and white images. Now, in one image, a little child in the foreground is climbing the ladder of an old metal slide. We see a silhouetted figure in the background that is shadowed under the boughs of a tree. This figure is tall and thin with what seems to be tendrils creeping from about its shoulders, and more children are gathered around this figure. In the second image, we see a glowering child staring into the camera from the right corner foreground. There are other children following behind. They're all sort of caught in a conversation as they walk toward the camera holder. Behind them all is this tall figure who has this sort of wisp of white for its face and seems to have the suggestion of a suited body. Entries prior to Eric Nudsen's had simply just been photos, but Eric supplemented his pieces with small bits of text. Those read, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead." And one of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986, photographer Mary Thomas, missing since June 13th, 1986. And these are great photo manipulations. They're
really
done
are.
really well. They're also just really good photographs in general. I'm not sure if, I don't believe that these are photos that Eric himself actually took, because again, this was more of a Photoshop contest. But they're engaging photos, and you can find them very easily by just searching, Slenderman original photos. Our idea of Slenderman today is one of this ungainly, tall man with white skin. His face is usually featureless. Sometimes it's depicted as being scarred and almost sort of dragged and reshaped into smoothness. His limbs are very willowy, and he wears a simple black suit, white collared shirt, and tie. In an interview with Know Your Meme, Eric Nudsen is actually quoted as saying he wanted to, quote, formulate something whose motivations can barely be comprehended and which caused unease and terror in a general population. There are a variety of inspirations behind Slenderman, with Nudsen citing Stephen King's The Mist, urban legends of shadow people, we've got Silent Hill, we've got Resident Evil, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Gentleman, or this idea of Men in Black, not MIB Will Smith Men in Black, but just this overall concept of traversing entities.
If you do not know about the original Men in Black, and if you're into like supernatural and alien stuff, I highly recommend. It is so interesting and cool and fascinating. I am a big Last Podcast on the Left fan. They did a pretty good mini series if you can get through their humor taste. They did, I think, like a 3-part episode series on the Men in Black, and they also have done one about the black-eyed children as well, which is something very similar. So Highly recommend looking into those if you're into that kind of urban legend, alien, spooky stuff.
People in the thread, as is the nature of internet forums, very quickly began to add their own ideas. User Thoreau Up, which I think is a genius name, and I really appreciate it.
Really good.
Created a folkloric story that was set in 16th century Germany, which involved a character named Der Grossmann, which translates to the tall or the great man, and implies that this was an early reference to the Slender Man. Slender Man's mythology intersects here with the ARG or alternate reality game Marble Hornets.
We're going to have to do a Marble Hornets episode one day.
Hell yeah, let's bring Nico on, just as like a fun guest to talk about.
I have so many friends who love Marble Hornets, and I have friends who've like met the team who've made Marble Hornets. Like
Marble Hornets is responsible for a lot of the Slender Man lore that we have now.
Yes, definitely.
Which I wasn't aware of. So
yeah.
A post on the Something Awful thread by user Segars begins sharing a video series following a film school student named Alex Crayley who stumbles into something troubling while creating his first feature-length project, Marble Hornets. It's a found footage series, and it offers a story that's meant to be believed as reality and explores the filmer's fictional experience with the Slenderman. That ARG, like many others, included other media feeds such as a Twitter feed and a second YouTube channel. I'm going to circle back around to ARGs when we talk a little bit about the stabbing incident. So in 2012, Slender the 8 Pages was released. This was a video game, and within its first month of release, it had been downloaded over 2 million times.
Oh, what a simpler time.
If you're not familiar, Slender the 8 Pages sort of set a precedent for horror games for a very long period of time. And if you're curious, I'm sure you can find
it's so
any
bad.
number
It's
of
delightful.
playthroughs online.
Wow, I'm getting very nostalgic with this episode, oddly enough. I'm really
But the idea,
it.
right, is that you're walking, it's a first-person perspective, you have a flashlight through these dark woods, and you're finding notes, and ooh, Slenderman's coming for you the entire time. Ooh, Slendy.
You gotta go get some pages on some random trees, and then go into the creepy abandoned school and get more pages, but don't get caught. I think the farthest I ever got was 5 pages. Oh my gosh. It came out when I was in college, so I spent a lot of time playing it with friends. We would like all take turns playing together, and we all would like purposely turn off the light in the dorm room and stuff like that. It was wow.
I love that there are just thousands probably of reskins of this game, and I'm a big fan of the one with Shrek.
Oh, definitely.
So Slenderman's virality has only continued from there. He is incredibly mimetic in nature, and part of his lore has this aspect, right, where that he can almost spread truly virally in terms of thought and being shared. So there were incalculable amounts of fan art, fan fiction, and fan movies. The internet was saturated with Slenderman content. And if you went to a convention, if you went Halloween trick-or-treating, you probably saw somebody wearing a suit, wearing a white morph suit underneath, and cosplaying a Slenderman.
Yes.
Because his lore is quite nebulous, and it is built by numerous people, all who have different iterations and motivations and ideals for their stories, it encourages others not only to take part in the creation of Slenderman, but to pick and choose which story aspects appeal most to them, the ones which they find most fascinating or more horrifying. In that way, people are able to really build a catered version of Slenderman to themselves, their community of friends, that feels the most authentic and the most horrifying. We also see Slenderman boom in popularity at the same time that social media really sort of begins to interconnect with itself. So Facebook and YouTube are beginning to kind of start to work more in collaboration with each other. They're beginning to, it is far easier to integrate all your different social media applications into each other and share amongst them. Tumblr is a huge thing at this point. We're seeing these micro communities built in a way we have before, but not as accessible to teenagers. The internet is becoming more and more of a veritable playground at this point, and children are having more and more access to it than they ever have had before. This is also at a point in time where we're seeing schools start to incorporate, laptops, iPads more frequently. Smartphones are very accessible. Lots of children have them at this point. We are still only today, as we record this, learning the impacts of social media and digital content on children, and our vocabulary around those things is constantly evolving and developing. So try your best, if you're listening to this, to remember the kind of conversations that were happening around you in 2012 about these sorts of things. I was 13 at the sort of emergence of Slender Man into popular media. He caught on very quickly.
I was 2012. I was 17. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 17, 18.
Yeah, I went back a little bit further for myself because in 2012 I would have been like 15 then.
Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah. I distinctly remember my walk home from my good friend's house, who I spent most of my time at. I had to go through a wooded thicket, and there was a solid month where he insisted that I needed to watch out for Slender Man, and thank you for that, Adam. I did not like that, and I, as a teenager, was not immune to fear of the veritable bogeyman. So, if we backtrack a little bit, I want to talk a bit more about Slender Man's imagery and sort of the lore around him. He has these tendrils that are sometimes tentacles, sometimes they're shadows, and sometimes those tentacles replace his arms altogether, and sometimes they give him mobility like spider legs, as though his more humanoid body is only a decoy, a la a football fish, right? He has an ability to teleport, and he's frequently associated to abandoned locations or deep forests, areas that are uncomfortable to be in, especially if you are by yourself. Mm-hmm. Also, areas where you hear creaking and droning and cracking from the limbs of trees and things like this, and anything can startle you. Those in close proximity to Slender Man, whether or not they're aware of it, may experience what has been dubbed the Slender Sickness, which includes bouts of nausea and vomiting, very rapid and sudden onset of paranoia, sometimes even nosebleeds. There is an idea in some versions of the story that as soon as a person becomes aware of Slender Man's existence, he becomes aware of them, and that's when he'll begin to hunt them down, he'll find them, he'll appear to them in dreams and begin haunting them that way. Later iterations of Slender Man stories have included the addition of a mansion, often in another plane somewhere in a forest, where Slender Man lives alongside other creepypasta characters such as Jeff the Killer, or Mr. Ben Drowned, which I think would also be like really fun episodes to go over if people are interested in that.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. I feel like definitely at least one on Ben Drowned. I feel like that really changed the surface of fandom culture for a minute there. So I think that would actually be a pretty fun episode. And also Jeff the Killer, I feel like, is also a very rich vein. So yeah, highly agree on both of those.
Every teenage girl wanted to have Jeff the Killer as her boyfriend.
Oh my god, stop. Don't say those words again.
Slender Man's mythos has often revolved around children and teenagers, sometimes featuring young adults investigating him. Marble Hornets introduced multiple key ideas to the Slender Man mythos, including that he could interfere with video and audio recordings. They also introduced the Slender Man symbol, which is a circle with an X drawn through it. And they also created the idea of proxies, which are humans who fall to Slender Man's influence and do his bidding. And initially, Marble Hornets portrayed these individuals as being like very violent, irrational, almost feral or rabid in nature. Slender Man stories, I think, interestingly enough, very rarely include excessive violence or the more traditional shock, horror, and gore we find in many other creepypasta stories. Because we don't have a concrete idea as an audience of what sort of monster the Slender Man is or his motivations, there is an unsettling, creeping horror that comes with him and again can help mold him into a horror more personal and easily projected upon. There's not this idea of like Slender Man stealing children to siphon off their life force. There's nothing like that. It's like Slender Man has a weird affinity for children, and we don't know why. He seems to, want to kidnap them for whatever reason, but sometimes he's not even interested in kidnapping them. There's a lot of resemblances drawn between Slender Man and the Pied Piper, and if you are unfamiliar with the Pied Piper myth, which is like actual folklore, there is this idea, right, that a village is overrun with rats, and they desperately need to get rid of this problem because the rats are destroying their food stores and they won't be able to make it through winter. So the Pied Piper comes around, and the people are like, hey, can you get rid of our rats? And he's like, hell yeah, I can get rid of your rats. You just gotta pay me. And they're like, cool, get rid of the rats and we'll pay you. And he's like, chill. And he blows his fun little pipe, and all the rats follow him out. And then he's like, cool, can I get paid? And they say, nah, I don't think so, because we don't have the rats anymore. And he's like, you fools. And he starts playing his pipe again, and all the adults in the village are just frozen, immobile, and all of the children follow him away, and he just takes all of them. It's unclear what he does with them, but this is, the idea of you reap what you sow, essentially. I know that it is a cardinal sin to quote from Mr. Wikipedia, but I would actually like Teese to read this paragraph because it's a really quick and tasty cross-section of the appeal of Slender Man.
Perfect. Sheer Chess describes the Slender Man as a metaphor for helplessness, power differentials, and anonymous forces. Peck sees parallels between the Slender Man and common anxieties about the digital age, such as feelings of constant connectedness and unknown third-party observation. Similarly, Ty Van Horn, a writer for The Elm, has suggested that the Slender Man represents modern fear of the unknown. In an age flooded with information, people have become so unaccustomed to ignorance that they now fear what they cannot understand. Troy Wagner, the creator of Marble Hornets, ascribes the terror of the Slender Man to its malleability. People can shape it into whatever frightens them most. Tina Marie Boyer noted that the Slender Man is a prohibitive monster, but the cultural boundaries he guards are not clear. Victims do not know when they have violated or crossed them.
I think that's nice, tight, and tasty. Don't take that out of context. I think the only one there that I'm a little eye-rolly at is the idea of modern fear of the unknown, because the idea that there is a modern fear of the unknown is a little ridiculous to me, considering humans have always been frightened of their own blind spots and ignorances, and that's often what leads to so much trouble. I don't think that's new. But that goes to the timelessness of Slender Man, and so we have a creature, essentially, that has been made. He is folklore. I mean, I don't know if teenagers are still as interested or knowledgeable about the Slender Man, but when I was a teenager, this was very much something that people were talking about as if it were real, and that it was something that needed to be feared, and you needed to be aware of it, and it was something that was almost like a fun story to tell, and we have an exact pinpoint on the origin of this. And people are like, well, that means it can't be folklore. No. You're just watching it be made. It'll be lost someday. One day we won't know where it came from.
No.
And then this podcast will be gone and people won't be able to sort it. At this point, I do think it is pertinent that we talk about the stabbing. So, the stabbing occurred in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I would strongly recommend against watching the HBO documentary Beware the Slender Man. I watched the documentary for my research, and I found it approached the case from an anti-technology perspective. It was less than empathetic to the parties involved, and it leans pretty hard into the moral panic that arose in the aftermath of this incident. So, this stabbing did cause a moral panic, unfortunately, as most crime involving children often does. So, we're going to do a quick flyover of the event so that we have a nice little fashioned you're wrong about all of this, because I've heard wildly different perceptions of what happened during this, and pretty much all of them were incorrect or really disturbingly misinformed. On May 31st, 2014, 12-year-olds Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser stabbed their friend Peyton Lautner 19 times with a 5-inch blade. Anissa Weier and Morgan Geyser believed they needed to murder their friend in order to become proxies of Slenderman and also to save the lives of their families. Morgan and Anissa told Peyton they would go for help, but they left her where they had stabbed her in Davids Park, which was a wooded area. It was a cyclist who found Peyton after she had dragged herself to a nearby road. Anissa and Morgan were found and apprehended near Interstate 94. Though they had intended to walk to the national forest, they had only made it just shy of 5 miles from the site of the incident. Peyton Lautner recovered in the hospital and was discharged a week later, and she returned to school in September of that same year. Once again, this is not a true crime podcast, and I think we all have a lot of complicated feelings about true crime. I do not personally think this is a case of internet bad, watch your children online, though that is an aspect of it. I think this case, more importantly, speaks to how crucial it is to talk candidly and openly with your children about mental illness. Morgan Geyser, in the proceedings of this case, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which her father also has. He's been diagnosed with it. He was living his life. He was, to my knowledge, medicated. This was not something that for him was causing what clearly caused the very severe issues for Morgan. There is a portion of this case in pointing to police interrogation of Morgan Geyser where people have claimed she felt no empathy or remorse for what she had done. I personally think that it is a gross misreporting. I think it assumes that empathy and remorse all look and feel the same for people. Morgan does ask about Peyton in the footage of the interrogations that we've seen. She asks her condition. She asks how she's doing as she's being interrogated. She is a child who is severely mentally ill. She did something incredibly horrifying. She also felt that she had no other option because of her own neuroses. Mental illness is not something that is rational. I am pretty horrified by the way people have chosen to characterize her. You can demonize technology and you can monitor your child's access, but if you're not actually having earnest conversations with them in all of their other time, then I don't know that you're actually mitigating or preventing any of the damage that might be done to your child online. Like you can block off your children's access to the outside world, but if you're not actually giving them constructive support and forming a genuine relationship with them as a parent, I don't know that you're actually helping at all. I think you're doing far more harm then, because then your child doesn't have any means of seeking a support system. I think we also have to understand and recognize that sometimes you can be an incredible, loving, supportive, earnest parent, and your child is still a human being who is capable of, just like you, doing really terrible things. The court tried both of the girls as adults in 2017, which means they spent over 2 years in a high-stress prison environment, deprived of physical contact, which, is classically really great for human beings, especially children, especially mentally ill children. Anissa Weir was found not guilty by mental disease or defect for her guilty plea of party to attempted second-degree homicide, and Morgan Geyser accepted a plea deal in which she would not go to trial, and she would have a psych eval to determine how long she would reside in a mental hospital. Morgan, too, was also found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. In 2020, Morgan Geyser petitioned to be retried as a juvenile, and her attorney argued she also hadn't been read her Miranda rights before she gave statements to investigators. The petition was rejected. It's worth noting that, to my knowledge, neither girl was allowed to call their parents upon being apprehended. I don't think minors should be able to sign their rights away without a supporting adult with them, and I don't think an investigator should count towards that. There's no part of me that says, there shouldn't be accountability for this crime, but I don't think prison is the answer. I don't think you have to look very far in our podcast to find our opinions on the prison system. In September of 2021, Anissa Weir was released with multiple stipulations after she submitted a statement of deep remorse in March 2021. It is the opinion of Peyton's mother that she did not serve enough time. Which I can understand that there are probably a lot of complicated feelings around that. That it's not my place to unpack for her.
Same.
Yeah. As much as I recommend against the documentary that I mentioned earlier, there's part of it that is deeply fascinating in that Anissa's father in particular, from the perception of that documentary, I don't like him. I don't super love how he talks to his children. His daughter gets very excited to talk to her friends on the phone because she's in prison, and he's like, you dial it back a bit, and it's like, oh my god.
I remember thinking the same thing when I watched it. I watched it like 2 years ago now at this point, and it's deeply frustrating and unsettling that just the whole situation happened. And I mean, you took the reins for this episode, so I haven't really like sat with my thoughts actively with this case in a while, but it is heartbreaking to see the lack of medical attention from a mental health perspective. And then I also wonder, I can't help but think about Morgan, who most likely wasn't schizophrenic, but didn't know how to tell a friend no, who... Anissa was?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anissa didn't really know how to tell a friend no, was in a situation of like, okay, yeah, this makes sense if like a friend that I care about is telling me this. Like, I think it speaks volumes to self-consciousness as well, and there's friendship through proximity, and just like all these different things besides just it being...
One of the people interviewed in the documentary argues that if the girls had had more friends, this wouldn't have happened, which I do sort of resent that idea, because I think it further edges home this point of like loners and isolation. And it's like, you also have to understand that Anissa Weir was bullied pretty severely by her peers. Her teacher says that probably at least once a week he found her crying because she was being picked on, and she's cast as this like really emotional child. And it's just like, these are children. At the end of the day, these are children who did not, obviously mental illness is part of this, but didn't have totally open avenues of communication. The parents are like, we didn't know that Slender Man was anything to be worried about. And it's like, by all accounts, he's not. No. That's not the thing that is the issue. It's not that the internet is evil. It's that there are other things stewing around in here. And I understand as a parent, you can't know 100% of anything that's going to happen with your child. And we can't sit here and say, like, if this had happened, then it wouldn't have happened. It has happened, Yeah. I think the reaction by the school district to then ban creepypasta across the county is ridiculous and further hurts the situation, because now you're telling children this is inappropriate for you, this causes murders, and it's like, that's not how this works.
I mean, Five Nights at Freddy's is real, and he's at my fridge every night, but I know he's not real at the same time. But that also comes with understanding of my mental health, that comes with understanding critical thinking, and children that age don't have the critical thinking skills, and especially if you are schizophrenic and unmedicated schizophrenic and don't have any learned coping mechanisms, or don't see a mental health professional or something. Like, I'm never going to talk poorly on schizophrenics. I hope I'm not in the situation, but I feel like if you don't have the proper toolbox, how are you going to help yourself, So
it's very frustrating to watch the documentary and see Morgan's mother go, oh, she showed signs since she was a very small girl, and we also knew her father was schizophrenic, but we didn't even want to think about it. And it's like, would it have hurt? Would it have hurt to just, maybe take your child for, an evaluation or a meeting? But all kids talk about monsters. I wish people would listen to children more. Because I think that's a huge part of this. I understand that this is a very touchy subject. I don't, of course, mean any disrespect towards Peyton whatsoever. What happened to her is horrifying and traumatic. The area where she was stabbed has since been cleared of the woods. Yeah, it was completely knocked down. This is a trauma that will be felt for a very long time in that community. And, Eric Nudsen came out and made a statement about it. The Creepypasta forums, the Something Awful forums, they all came out and made statements about it. They also hosted fundraisers to make sure that Peyton's medical costs were all taken care of.
Yes.
Yeah. I think this is, again, a really important time to remember how different the internet was back then, right? Because I mentioned I would bring up ARGs again. And ARGs are something that are intentionally misleading, and especially if you are a mentally ill child without a support structure in place for your mental illness in particular, that can really, heighten your delusion and can really add to your delusion. That doesn't mean ARGs shouldn't exist, but it does mean that we need to have conversations about how these sorts of things are disclosed without, quote unquote, ruining the immersion of it, and questioning to, how much is immersion worth when potentially this kind of thing could happen, right? There are arguments for both sides, and it is a very nuanced issue that we don't have a concrete answer to, because this is a relatively isolated incident. This is a really tragic, horrifying thing that happened, but I also wanted to talk about it because I've heard people recount this story in ways in which Peyton doesn't survive, or ways in which it's way more graphic. Or ways in which it is far more unfair to Anissa, to Morgan, to Peyton, to everyone involved.
I feel like, we understand, obviously, like, 19 stabbings, 15 or 19? 19. And that alone is enough graphic evidence. They're children. We don't need to see pictures. We don't need to know more information. Frankly, I don't even necessarily want to know the amount of stabbings it took. You know what I mean? In this moment, I feel like these children need to be protected in healthcare and stuff like that. And obviously, is us even talking about this part of the problem? I don't know. True crime is a complicated system that I have very complicated feelings for, but I feel like at this point, you can't really talk about a history of Slender Man without talking about this at this point, because it changed the face of the internet in a way. And there have been murders in relation to
the thing that upsets me about this in particular too is that it was of course then used for fodder for television drama. So Law and Order SVU has an episode on it, Criminal Minds has an episode on it. There are multiple television dramas that all did something, and it's disturbingly close to this case to a point that it is almost disgusting. So that is our sort of history and things you should know about Slender Man. If you have anything to contribute, leave it in the comments below. Thank you for hanging out. I know this episode starts off spooky and ends up in a place that's very difficult. Of course, there will be a content warning at the beginning of it, but thank you so much for sticking around and listening to the episode. We really appreciate you guys. You can find out ways to support Author's Note on our website. That's authorsnotepod.com. We have a Patreon where you get exclusive access to bonus episodes and more fun stuff, and polls to help decide what our topics are going to be, as well as, getting a cool sneak peek of what's coming up. We also have a Ko-fi if you're not into subscriptions. You can find us on Twitter and everywhere else. Again, check out our website. That's authorsnotepod.com. Maybe leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps other people find the show. My name is Cass, and you can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet at Valhethella. That's VALHETHELLA. Teese, where can people find you at?
You could find me at Vicuña. That's VICUNAD. And you could also find me writing for Fandom Spotlight, a pop culture news website. I wrote a really good piece about Squid Game and Kaiji recently, so check that out. Our theme music was done by James Yaiullo. You can find him on Bandcamp under James Y. Throw him $1 or $2. Buy some of his music if you feel so inclined. Cass, who did our cover art?
Our cover art is done by the wonderful and incredible Nyaliest. You can find her on Twitter. That's Nyaliest, NYALLIEST. Teese.
Cass.
What's something that doesn't have a fandom that you wish did?
Every week I'm asked this question, and you know what? I think there should be a bigger fandom for those little tiny miniature foods that you get in little gachapon machines.
Ooh,
I think those are great.
The little guys.
Yeah, those little guys. All right,
everybody. Until next time, surf the internet responsibly, have constructive conversations with the little ones in your life. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye. Next week. Baby gate.